Mariella Frostrop on Times Radio with Sky Arts, the UK's only channel dedicated to arts and culture. Now available free to air in the UK. Sky Arts, for everyone.
Well, with what sounds like a grim winter on the cards for all of us, we're better to look for relief then with comedy. But when Dawn French was on the programme earlier this week, she told me she wouldn't like to be starting out in comedy these days.
I want those edgy people there, challenging us all the time and making us laugh. The kind of laughs you have when you think that's one of the naughtiest things I've ever heard, or there's a person inventing a character who is everything awful. But now I just don't know if you'd ever be able to do that because you just have so many haters on your back. I don't know how we explore it anymore. I really don't know. I'm quite glad to be my age in a way.
Dawn French. So we wanted to ask how much the parameters of what you can joke about have changed. Is it more terrifying than ever to be a comedian? And are there any upsides to so-called cancel culture? Who better to answer such questions than a group of comedians? Suchandrika Chakrabarti, James Meehan, Leo Kearse and Laura Lex join me now. First of all, it would be great if each of you could sort of introduce yourselves and tell me what you consider your sort of brand of comedy shtick to be. Let's start with you, Laura. I know you started with a show called Lovely at Edinburgh, celebrating happiness before discovering the world was a bit more brutal. So are your shows very autobiographical?
Yes, they do tend to be, yes. I tend to write about whatever's on my mind at the time. So if that's something nice, it's something nice. And if it's something horrible, it's something horrible.
Fair enough, I guess. James, I know you've played Barney the dinosaur. Was that funny?
Oh, yeah. So that was very early on in my career. That was before I started stand-up. I started off as a blue coat at Pontins doing the entertaining. And
well, we're forensic with our research on this programme.
Yeah, and I was trained there as Barney the dinosaur, and that was great fun doing the show. I mean, it was tiring. The suit weighs about 6.5 stone, and you have to mime along to everything. So, but it was a good laugh.
Suchandrika?
Oh, well, I started comedy in January this year, so I've clocked up about 10 minutes on stage, but one of the sets was me speaking to my 2.5-year-old niece, and we're in the future and telling her about 2020, and the other set is about how you organise a hen do in lockdown, including like what happens with the stripper, because social distancing is a bit of an issue with that. So I think I'm covering the kind of range there.
I'm so happy to hear that people are still asking the important questions out there. Leo, what about you?
Hi, yeah, I'm a club comedian, so I tour around the country doing all the clubs. I never sort of get in the BBC or anything, but I guess my style is more sort of right wing and contrarian. So I'm poking at the sort of cultural power, because I think the right wing has got the political power in the country, but the cultural power is definitely held by the left. All the voices in the media, or most of them, are left wing. So I'm sort of poking at the hypocrisy and any funny stuff I can find there.
Oh, I quite like that theory. I think we'll unravel that a bit in a moment. James, do you still believe that nothing is off limits for comedians? I mean, just going back to what Dawn French was saying.
Yes, I do. I do believe that. I believe that no topic is off limits. That doesn't mean that certain topics are incredibly difficult to make the right joke about, and it takes a certain level of skill to make jokes about certain topics, whether you have certain undertones in what you're saying, or sub-narratives within the joke. But it's I don't think any joke is off limits.
But do you think hard about who you joke about in a way that you probably wouldn't have 20 years ago?
So I've been doing stand-up for 10 years, and already in that time, I think with different generations, what you can talk about changes, but that doesn't mean that any topic is off limits. It just means that the way you talk about them has changed. So, for instance, at the time when Dawn French was in her prime, she wouldn't be they wouldn't be interviewing the people who did the Black and White Minstrel show, saying why can't you do that anymore? Just in the same time, I just think we've progressed. We're a bit more sensitive, but that doesn't mean you can't joke about any of the topics.
I'm sure Dawn would argue that she's still in her prime, perhaps just not her comedy prime. I just thought I'd drop that in there.
Sorry, I didn't mean
speaking
it
for
anyway,
menopausal women out there. Leah, you said that you've been a direct victim of cancel culture after one of your routines went viral. What happened?
So basically, I was cancelled from the Perth Fringe in Australia last year. Just from my venue. People complained online. I had a routine that went a bit viral, and people complained that it was transphobic because I was talking about transgender issues. What they perhaps didn't realise, I mean, they maybe looked at me and assumed that as a sort of straight white man, I must be saying horrible things. But actually, I wrote the material with a transgender woman that I was dating. So it wasn't coming from a point. It was coming from a very informed point of view, and really not trying to punch down. It's talking about the issues and being inclusive rather than having a go at transgender people. So I found the whole experience quite like the cancel culture people, the woke people were actually shouting down quite a rare transgender voice in comedy. So I found they were, fighting against their own supposed best interests. They were trying to silence that voice, which is quite revealing to me.
Do you think if you had the platform of someone like, say, Ricky Gervais, who does get away with saying controversial stuff, that you wouldn't feel so cancelled?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Once you're famous, you can say what you like, and it'll just get you headlines. It's not like your fans are going to desert you. I've got about 12 fans in the whole world, so I don't have that sort of people there to buoy me up. So for me, I genuinely do get cancelled, and it costs me loads of money. But I mean, the flip side of that is it does get me some notoriety, and get me in the media and stuff. But I mean, the notoriety isn't really. Then I get people coming to my shows who think that I'm transphobic, and the shows, and then they're disappointed because it's not. So
you can't win, can you? Basically,
you can't win.
Laura, do you think that there is such a thing as getting cancelled, or do you think it's just, let me say, democratic censorship?
Well, I think it's very interesting for a cancelled person to be on the radio discussing all the exposure they got from being cancelled. I'm not sure cancelled is quite the correct word there, is it?
We could be being pioneering, couldn't we?
I think there's a problem with people who don't understand the context having an opinion. I think.
What do you mean by the context?
Well, I don't think you should sort of be on the internet screaming about something unless you've seen the whole show. So I think in order to sort of be calling for cancellations and that sort of thing, I think you have to have the full remit of information. But then I think there's also personal responsibility to be taken, because, for example, I did a show last year that had a 15-minute section on trans issues and didn't run into any trouble. So I wonder if there's something in the tone of the comedy that you think, have I delivered this wrong? Or have I think you have to look at it from all angles.
But aren't the words sort of acceptable and comedy strange bedfellows?
Sorry, what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean that you say it depends on your tone. So you're suggesting that there's an acceptable way of making jokes and there's an unacceptable way. That would be what tone would suggest to me.
I think to a certain extent, because comedy exists within capitalism. So you're offering something and seeing if an audience wants to accept it. And if they don't, they're very welcome to take their money elsewhere. So I think to a certain extent, it's not that you have to bend your art, but I think if you're trying to sell your art, you have to find buyers for it.
So Chandrika, do you think that the argument could be made that comedy is just becoming uncomfortable for people who have normally felt safe and secure in society and now they're getting poked, straight white men, for example?
Well, I think what James mentioned earlier about society progressing is true. Like when Dawn French and Jennifer Saunders were pioneering women in comedy in the early 80s, the world was a slightly different place. But the main thing that's changed is the internet, because you can do a set, and what you probably do is try that set out again and again in different venues, take it back and edit it, try it out again. Like a stand-up set doesn't live on its own on the page. But now every time you do it, it can be videoed, it can be quoted on Twitter, it will live on the internet beyond you. So it'll be taken out of the context of how you said it, first of all. And secondly, something that you felt was throwaway and kind of very hooked into the zeitgeist of that day, it can come back to you 3 years later. Well, you said this in 2017 and it's not acceptable now. And I don't think we've learned as a society to deal with how the internet makes everything live forever. I mean, my background's in journalism. That's how I've come to comedy. And I think with journalism as well, we've still not quite worked out, I've changed over time, but views I expressed back in 2008, they're still there somewhere in the Wayback Machine, and someone can Google you and find it. So are you still the same person? Should you still face the same criticism? And also, people can self-publish now. So every single one of your followers on Twitter can tell you their opinion. Is that overwhelming? Probably yes. Can you take all their feedback? Probably not.
Laura, do you agree?
Yeah, I do. I really do. I think that that's a huge problem. I think we are less willing to give people chances to change, and we're less willing to listen, and our attention spans are short. So like somebody sees Leo's doing a show about this and it's probably a problem, and I'll get cross at it before I've done any kind of research. And I do think the internet's a problem. I've chosen my last show is going nowhere near the internet, because I just decided it's for a room of people, it's for the atmosphere, it's for live. And I don't want somebody with no interest in investing the time to listen to me to be able to have an opinion.
It's interesting you say that, though, because, of course, anyone in that audience could film it and put it on the internet. So, you're never free, are you?
No, not really. I mean, I think it was Russell Howard recently, wasn't it, who walked off, just said, look, if you're not going to stop filming me, I'm going. And I think that is something like, I don't know how the others feel, but I'm missing that liveness so much with the lockdown, of having that room and having time to go with me for a minute, like come with me for just a second. And I promise this is going somewhere much more interesting if you give me the rope to potentially hang myself with, or take us for a lovely walk, Whereas I don't think you get that time. You get outraged so quickly online.
Leo, tell me about your relationship between, the sort of online comedy and live on stage comedy.
Yeah, I mean, clips can go viral online. I've had a few go viral, and it's great. It gets you more followers. I honestly think online is fantastic. I mean, YouTube, I've got getting on for 6,000 followers on YouTube, which, I mean, it's not a lot in the grand scheme of things, but it means I get money and I get exposure that, somebody like me is going to be very difficult to get on the BBC this year.
There are other stations.
We can bypass the gatekeepers by publishing directly to YouTube. The flip side of the internet is, as Laura said, it's very easy for people to get offended. I think a lot of the time people aren't actually offended. They just want to broadcast to everybody that, look, I'm a good person. I'm complaining. I've seen this racism, this misogyny, this homophobia, whatever it is. So I'm complaining about it. So it's and like in the old days, if you wanted to protest something, you had to make a placard and like go and sit outside the theatre and wave the placard and shout. So I can respect that. There's some sort of investment of labour, and now you just need to write a few lines on the internet, and that's you protested against something. And if enough people do it, if a protest goes viral, gets traction, the person can get cancelled. Has even a stronger impact than people waving placards. And,
indeed. I mean, in many ways, James, isn't it quite good to be offending people? I mean, you could increase from your 12 fans to maybe 14 or 16 if you get seriously offensive. I mean, there must be a point at which it becomes a kind of career move to attract that. If you think that you can deal with it, I suppose, on a personal level. I spoke to a Scottish a poet yesterday who'd had a very bad experience with people attacking her on Twitter. But who'd thankfully sort of managed to survive it. But I'm very interested, James, in the work you've done on class and offence in comedy. Tell me a bit more about that.
Yeah, so I'm from a council estate in Lancashire. I was raised by a single parent on benefits, and I was incredibly lucky. A show I was involved in 2014 in Edinburgh won one of the awards, and it all of a sudden gave me a little bit of attention from the TV and radio industry, and I got a bit more of an insight into that. And one of the main things that I picked up on very early on, and I still believe this now, is that class is one of the only areas of diversity that still hasn't really been paid attention to. And I'm always very careful when I mention that I think there should be more working class people on the television and on the radio and on the panel shows, because I think, being a straight white man myself, I think there's an unwritten association that wanting a working class voice means wanting a white or a right-wing voice, and that's not the case. There's women, black people, gay people who are all from working class backgrounds. And the TV and radio industry, the panel shows seem to be filled with people who are black, gay, female, male, from every demographic, but there's a lot of nepotism. They all seem to have come from Cambridge or Oxford. And to me, that doesn't speak diversity. I want to see people from underprivileged backgrounds having their voice heard. And I've done quite a few. I've done a show on that. I've done talks at a few universities on it. And it's not going to change until the powers that be let it change.
Laura, your thread on Twitter about your fantasies focused on the, God knows why, the football manager Jurgen Klopp, and they went viral. Did you have any hesitations about writing the thread? Because I guess if this was a man writing this, there was some of it that might have been found to be quite offensive.
Personally, I don't think so, because I wrote the thread very carefully to not objectify. It never makes...
But there were times when you were objectifying Mr. Klopp, weren't there?
I don't think so, because I think objectify would state to remove the humanity from them and treat them as a sexual object, whereas the point of the thread was glorifying in behaviour and personality. Because I hate being exposed online, I'm generally very cautious about what I put out. I really despise confrontation. It makes me so anxious and nervous. So I do think quite carefully, and I think that's a good thing. But yeah, I mean, I got that thrown at me at the time. People going like, oh, if a man wrote this about a woman, and there were lots of women and men jumping in and going, what, if a man wrote about how intelligent and lovely and professional a woman seemed, do you think that's what women are mad about?
Yeah,
that was my take on it anyway.
But Suchandrika, Laura was talking there about, despising confrontation. Is it possible, do you think? I mean, Dawn French's concerns were about the softening of the edges of comedy. Is it possible to be a comedian and not want to confront?
By the way, I just would say about Laura's thread on Jurgen Klopp, I was with you all the way on that thread. It's brilliant. I think it's completely possible to go into comedy and not necessarily want to offend. It depends on what kind of comedian you want to be and how you want to use the power that you have as a comedian. And there's a power from being on that stage and standing above everyone and being the centre of attention. And then there's a power of then being like the brand of that comedian who's got however many followers online, and people are flocking to your YouTube videos and wanting to see what your take is on the next big news item. So I think, if you're the kind of person who does enjoy that kind of shock and people kind of going, oh, can I laugh at this? Then that's your brand of comedy, and you're going to keep working around the so-called edges of what's acceptable and keep pushing those boundaries. I don't think you have to do that to be a comedian. I certainly don't think it's the kind of comedy I do. And I wouldn't say every comedian who's on TV at the moment is doing that. And not every audience wants that from a comedian either. So again, it's really about thinking, I have this power. And a lot of people out there on the internet are probably quite envious of that power, as well as enjoying the fact that you have that power. What do I want to do with it today in this particular set at this festival? How do I want to work it into my career? What kind of career do I want to have? And going with that, I mean, I don't think you could stop anyone trying to push those boundaries. The question is, if in pushing those boundaries, are you punching up or are you punching down? Because if you're punching up, then fine, that seems like the right thing to do to speak truth to power. But if you're punching down and you are making fun of marginalised groups and people who don't have as big a platform as you, what you're doing is then adding to the stereotypical idea of those people. And you're adding to the fuel that anyone who has a go at them can kind of use and say, well, that comedian said it about you, it must be true. So it's just
Thank you so much for summing it up so succinctly there. Thanks to Suchandrika Chakrabarti, who's currently writing for the News Quiz on Radio 4, Laura Lex, whose book Klopp actually is out now, James Meehan and Leo Kearse.